This is the ripple effect of well-being in work and life. I'm Dr. Ken Thompson, here with Dr. Stephanie Romero.
On this show, we explore how holistic well-being practices can transform our individual lives and our collective capacity for care.
We're bringing you the science, the stories, and the specific practices that reduce stress and build resilience in our homes, our offices, and our communities.
We're talking to people to see how their perspectives, practices, and work are creating a ripple effect for a better world.
Thanks for joining us.
Welcome back to the ripple effect. We often hear the phrase mind over matter, but what happens when the mind is exhausted and the matter, our bodies, is carrying the weight of unspoken trauma, anxiety, and the pressure to perform? Today's guest spent 2 decades at the peak of physical discipline as a professional dancer and outreach artist. But behind the grace of the stage was a silent struggle with a crippling eating disorder, anxiety, and a deep disconnection from self. Her journey wasn't about pushing harder, it was about learning how to finally stop running and start arriving. Allie Greene is a licensed social worker, somatic movement educator, and therapist who bridges the gap between evidence-informed psychotherapy and body-based healing. As the founder of Soma Movement and a practitioner at My Wellness Center, Allie helps people move through chronic stress and depression, not by fixing what's wrong, but by reclaiming the innate wisdom of their own nervous systems. Allie integrates principles from body-mind centering and embody yoga to help us understand that to truly heal it, we have to learn how to feel it. Allie, I'm so honored to have you here to help us explore how slowing down and coming home to our bodies can be the most radical act of resilience we'll ever take. Well, Allie, it's such a pleasure to be in conversation with you. I know you've been working to support our work a little bit here at Awaken and have so many things that line up with what we do in the world. So I'm just so glad to get to know you in a deeper way through this conversation.
I'm happy to be here, and I love working with Awaken and the time I've spent with Dawn, the program director, and just really enjoying the community that you've created.
Awesome. Yeah, so good. So I would love to know your story. How did you find mindfulness? And I know you're integrating it not just in your personal life, but also in your professional life. So how did that come about? And yeah, I'd love to just hear your story.
Sure. Well, it's the journey story, right? Everyone has one. And, I feel like mindfulness has been in my life for a long time. I am a former professional dancer. So it was always a part of my practice to bring myself, into my body, center myself before performances, and have that, I would even use the word sacred time in the studio before rehearsals would begin, and you'd find your spot in the space and just be with your body, quiet your mind. And then, interestingly enough, as someone who has been in my body a long time, but I would say in my body in certain ways, I feel like we have places we inhabit regularly and places maybe not so much. I started to develop a very severe anxiety issue. And the process of healing my nervous system from that included mindfulness, a regular practice, moment by moment, really, throughout my day of just bringing myself back into the present, because with anxiety. There's all of the what ifing and all that future focused that would just really rev me up. So that's where it came out of, say a studio space or a room, and really entered into my life in a regular, almost pedestrian way. And that led me to the somatic work that I do now. I thought, I want more. And I would like to find ways to be mindful and present and create a deeper relationship with myself through the body as well as the mind.
Yeah, that's really a beautiful story. I think often people don't think about the body and the mindfulness of body as an entry point all the time. Usually people think of sitting meditation as the way we all get started, but I love that your story is different in that way, and that it also encompasses like art.
Yeah, I found that I was um, struggling with, when we talk about like trauma responses, a lot of freeze state. So for me, getting going was very important to bring me out of that. And so, but I also wanted the getting going to be mindful, and as opposed to, I'm just going to exercise or exhaust myself, or, kind of, to me, that's another form of dissociating. Um, so yeah, the movement part was very important, and I bring that into my practice now. So I'm a mental health therapist, and it's interesting how what you go through yourself. I don't know if it's the energy you're putting out, or maybe the things you're saying, that you attract people who are struggling with some of the same things. And so in my sessions with people, there is mindful movement, which might not be typical, what people would typically think of in a mental health therapy session. They tend to think of the talking part of things, which is really important. But if you are struggling to even just regulate yourself, that talk part doesn't quite make the cut.
Yeah, you're naming a couple of things there that are really important. One is the different ways we have our trauma response. And so, some people do dissociate and totally shut down and go numb, and other people use their busyness as a way to dissociate from feeling things, right? And we don't always think about that as a trauma response. I was actually having a conversation with a friend of mine, and she's having some struggles in her life. And she said, I've just been having trouble getting going, trouble doing things. I'm feeling shut down because it's feeling overwhelming. And we were talking about the fact that my coping mechanism has been workaholism, right? And hers is shutting, like it's the opposite end, but it's the same, right?
Yes.
It's the same response. The difference that we noticed when we were talking is that society really validates my way of coping and says, oh, you're doing a great job, you're high functioning,
Mhm.
right? But internally, for me, when I'm in that state, I'm not high functioning emotionally, anyways, right?
Yeah, yeah. I just finished up teaching a course. It's called Beyond the Muscles. It's trauma informed teaching for movement professionals, because I think it's very important for Pilates teachers, yoga teachers, fitness professionals to understand that trauma's already in the room. It's not over there. It's not, oh, well, I'll get ready when that client walks in. They're here, and helping to define what those trauma responses look like in those, fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Um, we have a tendency to, from the movies, I think, um, have our ideas of what trauma looks like or PTSD. But what you just named, the busyness, and then getting rewarded for it, there's that hypervigilance. And, I will say to people when they say, well, no, I just really enjoy it. Like, I like multitasking. I like being really busy. And I'll say, how do you feel when there's nothing to do? Are you comfortable with that? If you are, great. If you're not, let's talk about it. So that discomfort of stillness and quiet is something I don't think a lot of people kind of pause and examine in themselves, because it is so normalized to just be busy, busy, busy.
I love that you're naming that because I've had so many people who have wanted to meditate come to me and say, I can't be still. Or we'll do a day of practice and they'll come and like partway through, they're like, I need to leave. I can do 5, 10 minutes on my cushion at home, but I cannot do a whole day of just sitting and being with myself. And I think that it's exactly that. Like you're constantly moving and like you said, either hyper vigilant or using the busyness to mask, right? The underlying emotions, that it's just excruciating to get still. It's
Yeah.
excruciating to get still. And for me, I mean, maybe there was a period in my life that was like that, but I think that's partly why I crave meditation, is because I know that I'll hit that autopilot constant busyness and I have to make myself stop because that's my way, my default way, right? Is the over busyness. So I just crave the time to just sit and be. And I often refer to it as porch sitting. So I grew up with two grandmothers that both did porch sitting where they would get, my one grandma loved a beer, so she'd go sit on the porch with a beer, and my other grandma would do like a lemonade, or so she wasn't a beer drinker or anything like that. But they would just sit on the front porch and they'd people watch, they'd talk to the neighbors, or they'd just sit there and enjoy the evening, when the weather was good. And I feel like we've lost that. Like now, if we're just sitting, we're watching TV, we're binging Netflix, we're on YouTube or Instagram, or like we don't just be. And I think that again, that constant busyness is a way of avoiding.
Yeah, I agree. I think to define the difference between distraction and rest. I think people are excellent distractors, and we have created all of this technology to help us be excellent distractors that even impact our neurobiology. Every time we get on that phone or we hit the Netflix for the next episode. I'm totally guilty of that. I binge watch Netflix. I'm not, special. And we're getting those dopamine hits. So it's literally, rewiring the brain to make things even more challenging. And I bring up the word safety a lot in what I do because it's so foundational to the ability to, be with oneself. And there are so many people that don't really have that foundation. And we live in a culture that I think also strips that away from us. When we look at policy that makes people very vulnerable, medically, financially, all of these basic things, there's going to be that sort of underlying resonance of it's not safe. And I think keeping busy or dissociating, is a way to remove yourself from those feelings because they're really, really hard. So the question is, how do you grow that capacity which is one of the things that I love about Awaken, that you guys aren't just saying, hey, come on, let's go meditate. You're creating, educational opportunities for people to learn how, when people say, I suck at meditating. It's like, no, you just need to practice. It's just a practice, and even in the classes that are given through Awaken, it's always interesting, and I appreciate at the beginning and at the end how there's an opportunity for people to share their experiences, so that when that person says, I couldn't get my mind to be quiet, like I failed in a way, they might not use those exact words. There's someone there saying, you absolutely did not. That's meditation. To bring yourself back, Like meditating is not a competitive sport.
Yeah, it's the noticing. It's
Yeah.
the noticing that actually, when we're caught up in all the daily activities, we don't even notice that our minds are racing. It's when we take the moment to pause and sit and notice, we're like, oh, yeah, I have a really busy mind, actually,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And how am I relating to it?
Yeah. Yeah. To build capacity, to grow
Yes.
capacity.
Yeah.
I think it's Dan Siegel refers to it as the window of tolerance.
Yep.
I like the word capacity because it's very
Yeah.
autonomous rather than like I'm tolerating something, I'm tolerating my thoughts or um, so capacity. And that's very profound. The ability to hold all things about yourself.
Which is not easy.
No, it's
It's
not.
not easy. It is not easy at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am curious though, in this idea, we were talking kind of about our culture and the lack of ethos of safety net that has just been eroded, especially in these last years. Um, how do you view these practices as a way to create safety, a way to create change for ourselves for the better, ways to hold all this difficulty? I mean, right now in the world, like if you just put on the radio for 10 minutes, it's completely overwhelming, right? So how do you make those connections for folks that you work with?
So I think it's important to establish that there is stuff out there all over the internets, telling us how to hack in, how to, do that, let's do a fix. And while I find all of those things to be, you know, okay, I call them prescriptive. So I feel like there's prescriptive exercises and then there's repatterning practices. And I think it's important to be mindful with the prescriptive exercises because they tend to point the finger in. There's something wrong with you. You need to fix yourself. And let's do this exercise. And so I think a really healing yet simple thing is to remind people that they do live in a culture, that is not supportive, that it isn't just them, that trauma is not an individual issue. And I think that helps people come out of that isolated place, which is again why I appreciate classes, community. I'm not alone. And that's the number one thing that I remind people of. So when they're coming in for therapy, yes, you have to give someone a diagnosis. But I always say that's for insurance. You're a whole person. And then helping them reclaim themselves, to make themselves a home that they want to come to, and let it be this oasis in the crazy. And depending on the person, because some bodies are safer than others, is to, also work with, you do need to be armored and protective in certain environments, and that's okay. You do need to be more hypervigilant, and that's okay. What we want is flexibility. So, where are the safer places for you to go where you can then soften, where you can then move back inside yourself? Um, so to so it's a conversation about reality and flexibility, and the repatterning practices grow that flexibility. And to me, that's what meditation is. Meditation is a repatterning practice rather than prescriptive. Although I think some people think it's prescriptive. I don't know, you might have more to say about
Well,
that.
I think that people believe there is one right way to meditate, and that is false, right? And so, I study Tibetan Buddhism, and I know that in the traditional way of teaching meditation, an expert teacher would meet with a student and identify that student's personality, learning style, needs in the moment, all the things, and suggest types of meditation and practices that suited that individual person in the moment with who they are, what they were working with, all of the things, right? So to suggest that there's one size fits all meditation that's going to work for absolutely everyone in every moment is just a misunderstanding, right? In a way, I think it's the commodification of meditation as it's come to the West. Like, we just want how to do the thing. How do I do the thing, right? Right? This is how to do the thing. And if I do it this way, I'm getting it right. I got an A, right? Or whatever somebody thinks. And I think that's a misunderstanding. And so, like our course, the intro course we do is really an exploration of like working with all of our whole human self and emotions in a whole variety of ways with a bunch of different practices. And hopefully people land on a few that really work for them, because as you named in the beginning of this conversation, there are body-based practices. There are breath-based practices. There's practices to work with our mind. There's practices to work with different emotional states. And then there are all kinds of practices to increase our sense of connection with others, to work with forgiveness. I mean, I could go on and on and on. So I agree with you 100%. There is not a one size fits all thing. And you had named this earlier in the conversation, like each person is working with things in a different way and needs a kind of different remedy on how to deal with whatever they're dealing with. And that, there's so many ingredients that go into that recipe, right? So many things that influence that. But I think a couple of things that you said really struck me is this idea of flexibility to create safety where we and protection where we need that, and then soften and open in situations where that's appropriate. And I think there, like, what that for me is naming is wisdom of understanding the situation, but wisdom of knowing ourselves, which I think, especially for folks with trauma, there's this feeling of disconnection with self that, at least that's what I experienced in my own healing journey, is I didn't even know what was inside me. I didn't even know what I needed. It was hard for me to know what would be helpful because I was so disjointed and disconnected, right? And so I think what you're naming is a growth in understanding and wisdom and knowledge of self, our own needs, but also ability to see what's happening in our environment and respond appropriately.
Yeah, yeah. And the word self, no one can see me, but there's self, and I'm pointing to my head, my brain. And I feel like that's the self that a lot of people operate with. But then there's this self, and I'm pointing to my deep, deep belly. That is really my teacher, Lisa Clark, calls it essential self, which I just love. And the work that I learned from her is all developmental patterning, from in our embryological beginnings and so forth. And so that essential self is whole and untouchable. And so when we go there, and I feel like that is a place when we can kind of unhook from this self that's up in the head with all of its ideas about, oh, I'm this way and I'm doing, that constant chatter. We end up going into that deeper place, and that's why it feels so right and it feels so good. And there's a whole, field around attachment, and I think most of it is from the lens of attaching with other people, which is very, very important. And so we can be struggling with boundaries, which is that issue of, when do I tighten up a little bit to keep myself safe? When is it okay to soften? Do I have that kind of mixed up? Do I have no idea of where, I begin and someone else stops? That's, disrupted very early on in life for most of us. And then we don't really know that because it happened really early on in life, and no one sits us down and tells us that. And then we're these adults wandering around, with these, our childhood nervous systems. And so, the practice of coming back and attaching to self first, because that was the first bonding. We bonded with ourself when we grew ourself. And then we decided to grow our lovely little umbilical cord. We grew that and made the decision to connect to mom. And so to go back to those earlier places of that authentic, essential self is incredibly healing and teaches us that flexibility of boundary. Which then we as adults create lots of words for, and therapy techniques and all that good stuff.
That was beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I really love that kind of starting from the embryo perspective. So I've never heard it explained that way. That was really beautiful. I love it. I love it. Kind of switching topics. I think for people listening, not everybody has heard of like a somatic approach to therapy. And I kind of get that it's more embodied in using movement, but I guess if you were going to describe to someone what that difference is between traditional talk therapy and your approach, what does that look like for someone who's listening and thinking, I wonder if that kind of therapy would be right for me?
Yeah, there's more of the traditional talk therapy, which is examining thoughts. There's the beauty of psychodynamic theory, so that therapist is really listening to what isn't being said around what's being said. And and there could be someone who is much more educated in this than me, so I'm just giving my perspective. Always open to learning. With talk therapy, we're really working with what's conscious. And then the therapist is maybe trying to bring up maybe what's unconscious or under there. But it really is with a lot of the front part of our brain. And somatic work moves into, midbrain and brainstem area. And Somatics is a big umbrella term, and you can have somatic work that is more physically based, like Feldenkrais or Alexander technique, but I bring up the word psychophysical because even when we're working physically, it's all connected. So you could, go to an Alexander teacher and they work with your body, and you might find that, wow, I'm kind of approaching life a little differently as well. Or I feel more grounded, or I feel a little bit more peace when I, have a conversation with this person. But in mental health therapy, the somatic component is interweaving, kind of in quotation marks, the story, and also bringing in, where do you feel that? Can you stay with that? It's helping people process the somatic story that accompanies the cognitive story, and to process through that. The somatic approach that I use, I'll hodgepodge from, different therapeutic methods, but overall I work with body mind centering, which is a body of work. And I'm interested in helping people understand patterns, these patterns that we move through as we grow, and to become aware of where they have been disrupted, or where a pattern might be dominant and kind of not allowing something else to come through. And in body mind centering, there is a beautiful cycle called the satisfaction cycle, which we all move through when we're babies. And it begins with yielding. And yielding is a conscious choice to move towards support. So it's like our first yes. And I find that a lot of people, and it's not surprising when we were talking about how our culture is, have a deficit in this ability to yield. And it sets us up, that is like kind of foundational for the rest of the patterning, which is push. Push is boundary, and the ability to get ready to go out into the world. So if we don't have this foundation of yield, either we're not going to be able to push off successfully, or we push hard. And then from push, we move into reach. And reaching is all about desire, curiosity. And so if we don't have these, this lovely push, and we reach, maybe we can't reach far enough to get what we want, or maybe we reach but then we don't know how to yield, so we fall in whatever way we want to think of that. After that, we grasp and we pull. There's that discernment. I want this, not that. And to be able to get something and bring it to ourselves, or get ourselves to another place, is profound. And we're having these experiences when we're young. And again, psychophysical. I am capable, or I'm not. And then after that pulling in is to yield again, to, how'd this feel for me? So I look at that patterning within people's stories. Is this person a reacher? They just reach and reach and reach and reach. They've got 17 degrees and they're still not happy. Or someone that, I just like make up little stories, that person is like, I don't know, what do you want? I don't know, where do you want to go? That's someone that could work on, push and reach. So that is all words I just said, but the way we do this is through movement. I will ask people to show me when they're feeling a certain way about something. I say, can you create a posture that represents that? And it was really sweet. I'm working with a client that gave me a posture when they were really nervous about having to have a confrontational conversation. And that was a few weeks ago. And we met recently, and she said, oh, yeah, you know, when I get like, and she pulled herself into the position. And it was just such a great moment that she was using her body to express these words. And because this is a person that's a bit disconnected. So the movement is the words.
Yeah, it's reminding me, I don't know if you know the work of Ariana Hayashi's social presencing theater. Have you ever?
I
Oh,
don't.
you would love it.
Okay.
Ariana Hayashi is a very high level meditation instructor, and she's also a traditional Japanese dancer. And she created social presencing theater to use the body to help people work through issues or but not just individual issues. Like social presencing theater is community issues. So how do you get a group of people to embody a problem? Like, what would the physical embodiment of a community problem be? How would you structure it, right? And everybody represents some part of the problem. But you can also do it. So I got trained in this for individual problems. Like she has something called stuck. Like if you're stuck, what does it look like in your body? What would the posture be? And then how would you move out of that posture to get unstuck? And then what does that mean? It's just whatever you're just describing exactly what Ariana Hayashi does with her social presencing theater work, which is part of, we'll probably have to put all this in the notes. Part of, she works with Otto Scharmer, who does something called Theory U, like the letter U, which is out of MIT, which is a model for mindfulness based social change. And yeah, anyways, I could go off on that. But it's so interesting because you're describing exactly, they don't use the yielding, reach, push, grasp. They don't use those terms, but they have a whole model of how to move organizations and society from a place of being stuck and unenlightened. That's not the word they use. That's my word. To using our kind of higher consciousness and potentiality to guide us in solving the big complex problems of our world. Anyways, I went on a little rant there, but just exactly what you were talking about was reminding me of all of that work that I was trained in a while back. And I feel like there is a parallel because like each of us as individuals is a microcosm of the larger society.
Mhm. Yeah, we're connected whether we want to be or not.
Exactly, exactly. It's all connected.
Yeah, and I'm glad you went off on that because I'm going to look that up as soon as we're done because that sounds really exciting. And you know, I just think a lot about if people could be more embodied, what would this world look like? Because I see the disembodiment as the largest issue. Because if you can't understand that your own self is sacred,
Yes.
then you are not going to look at other people's bodies as sacred. And that is
Yes.
a huge issue that we're seeing.
I agree. I agree. Allie, it's probably about time for us to begin to wrap things up so we don't have a 2 hour conversation, which I think the way this is going, we could. Uh, but I'm curious if there was anything that you were hoping to talk about on this podcast in this conversation that we didn't touch on yet.
I think I would like to acknowledge the trend that is happening with the word somatics. We see it in social media, and somatics is about self-care, but that's just one component of it. And I feel that a lot of it gets represented as that, a commodification. And what I want to add is that somatics is, I think, authentic somatic work is about right relationship, with ourselves, with others, with the earth, even, ancestrally. And it is about liberation in all the ways that liberation is, and decolonization. And it's not new. It has ancient and indigenous roots, and we have so much need for it now because it was extracted and outlawed by colonizers. So as a white woman, I feel it's very important for me to name that this is not mine, and to give it the proper history, and to share that with other people, because that's what I'm seeing, like I said, on social media, and it kind of cracks me up because, a couple of years ago, people were like, somatic what? So yeah, so it's not just for self-care, it's not just for one's own sake, it's for the betterment of all of us, because when you embody yourself, then you are walking out into the world a much more present person and able to be in right relationship with others.
Thank you for adding that. I feel like that was super important to bring in. I'm just appreciating that. And we just know how much cultural appropriation happens continuously. So just appreciating that you named that for us and for folks listening, because somatics has kind of become a buzzword of late.
Yes.
It has. I love ending all my episodes by asking people if they have a resource they could suggest, like a book that has really helped you on your path, or something that you often recommend to folks who are interested in anything that we talked about.
Sure. So I would say, body mind centering, if anyone is curious about that whole body of work, it is so beautiful. And they offer courses. My teacher, Lisa Clark, offers courses and classes. And you don't have to be any kind of aficionado of anything to just jump in. They are very true to the belief that we're all part of the recipe, and beginner mind is really beautiful. And then the other book is The Politics of Trauma, which is authored by Staci Haines. And that's really going into that broader lens.
Great recommendations. Great recommendations. Well, Allie, it's just been so good to talk to you, and we haven't connected in a while, so to reconnect and learn a little bit more about your work in the world.
Well, thank you. This was wonderful, and I'm glad to get to sit down and talk with you as well.
Yeah, my great pleasure.